So you just touched down in a foreign country, and you spent the first couple months learning the language as well as getting settled. But we both know you didn't come here to learn the language. You didn't come here to get settled. You came here to teach the gospel to lost souls. So where do you start? I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, but I'm going to share with you guys what my approach has been so far. What's up everyone, my name is Dan Kane and this is my channel, Mindful Missionary. And so this video is going to be a little bit about these first couple steps I've been taking towards evangelizing my community and the city of Bo here in Sierra Leone, West Africa. So there are some pretty amazing opportunities to teach the gospel here in Sierra Leone. Let me just tell you, it has been incredible just how easy and natural and welcoming people are here to having spiritual and biblical and religious conversations here. Another advantage is that COVID-19 does not have a foot place here in Sierra Leone, okay? And that means that there's very, very, very little restriction when it comes to just engaging with people. And so I really feel for a lot of my friends and family in the US, especially the Christians that are passionate about evangelism, because they're having to think of ways to be able to encounter people kind of within perhaps some of the restrictions and within some of the difficult circumstances that are in the US because of COVID. Here in Sierra Leone, I don't have any of that for the most part. I just walk outside my compound and there are people everywhere to be able to talk to. So even though there are some significant advantages and opportunities here in Sierra Leone, there are also some challenges. One of those challenges that I think is significant is the language barrier for me. So I do not yet feel like I am fluent in Creole, even though I have been pouring myself into learning this language for the past couple months. However, I also don't feel like I'm ever going to get to the point where I feel comfortable and fluent without first kind of putting myself out there. So I've decided I'm not going to wait until I achieve this kind of level of perfection when it comes to my language familiarity with the common tongue here. And so that means I need to go out. But that just means there are times when I'm talking about the most important topic and subject in the universe, but I'm not able to do so clearly. And it's awkward, and I feel sluggish, and I feel so insecure regarding my Creole at times. And I'm not able to listen and understand the responses to my questions or to my ideas or the parts of scripture I'm trying to convey to people. And that's a pretty big challenge. However, I have to believe that God is able to work through my weaknesses, and I just need to put myself out there. So over these past couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks or so, I've been doing a lot more of that, where every day I've been actively engaged in talking to my neighbors, going on walks, setting up Bible studies. And even though I feel like I'm so far from being able to communicate effectively, it's not holding me back from doing what I think I ought to be doing here, which is just doing what I can. One thing I wanted to share that's not really a advantage, but it's also not really a challenge or an obstacle, it's just different than what I'm used to, is the fact that scheduling things is just not as much of a big deal here as is what I'm used to. So what I'm used to in the States is I would have a preliminary conversation with someone on the sidewalk or in the library, in the subway, at the bus stop, etc. And we'd have a preliminary conversation about the Bible or about Jesus, and I'd try to kind of gauge if they were interested or see if I could create some interest to reading the Bible with me. And then my next question is, when is a good time? Give me a day, give me a time that we can meet together in order to read God's Word together. However, I'm discovering people here don't operate with that same mentality. So here in Sierra Leone, things just aren't scheduled, all right? So if you're going to visit someone, you don't really tell them, I'm going to be there at this time on this day. You just say, I did come, which is like, I'm coming. I'll be there sometime. And, you just show up. And people just show up. So about every day here, at our home, we get about 5 to 10 visitors that knock on our door and are welcomed in. And I'd say hardly any of them we knew were coming or had scheduled them to come at all. It's just they show up. And so that's the same thing that happens when it comes to these religious discussions, when it comes to these conversations, when it comes even to Bible studies. It's not as much a scheduled thing as it is just as we encounter them, as we visit them, we go to their house, everyone knows where each other lives, and it's very, very, very welcome just to show up at people's houses and just to sit on their front porch with them and even bring a chair and just chill out. And in those situations, you're just able to sit down and talk or study or whatever. So it's not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily good, it's just the culture here. And I'm still thinking about how to best utilize this cultural dynamic for the gospel. I'll update you on that, I guess. So the first thing that I've done is I wrote down in English, actually, several, maybe 10, like religious, Christ-centered, Bible-centered discussion questions. Okay, so these are questions that as I'm talking to people, I can then just ask this particular question, and I feel like that question can then lead to a biblically productive, spiritually productive, religiously productive conversation between me and whoever I'm talking to. And so what I did is I wrote those questions down in English, and then I welcomed some of the Christian brothers here to come over and basically ask how to translate those questions into Creole. So I think I could communicate those questions in Creole without their help, but I thought, you know, it's really important for that question. If that question's going to be the foundation of our discussion, I want to make sure I ask the question well. And then after I ask the question, then, you know, I can do the normal kind of back and forth and trying my best in broken Creole to be able to communicate. But if at least I'm able to ask that question in a clear and effective way, then it's easier to use my broken Creole to kind of follow up on some of those discussion points. After I get these discussion type questions translated into Creole, then I write them down on my notebook that I keep with me all the time, and I memorize them, okay? And so just to kind of give you an idea of what are some of the questions that I'm asking people, I'm asking simple questions like, you not Christian, you not Muslim, is, you know, are you Christian or are you Muslim? So about 70% of the people here are Muslim, and so that's a pretty common thing to be able to ask, kind of get an idea of where this person's coming from. Also, how long you don't be Christian? How long you don't be Muslim? So this question is basically asking, were you always a Muslim? Were you always a Christian? Or did you convert, you know, from one to the other? And then I would ask a follow-up question regarding, well, what made you change your mind? What do you think say na the difference between Islam and Christian? So this is kind of asking, you know, what do you think the difference is between Islam and Christianity? Anyway, so there are about 10 different questions that I have here on this notebook. And then what I do is every day I go out for maybe 1 hour or 2 hours and I go on these walks, and there are all these different types of back roads that I can go walk down. And people are just sitting out in front of their houses, they're washing laundry, they're cooking dinner, they're just, you know, relaxing. And so I'll go out there and then I'll engage in conversation, and then pretty shortly after the conversation begins, then I'll just introduce one of these thought questions to them. And every time they've been so welcoming and so eager and so receptive to my question, and it's really produced some good opportunities. So when I'm in these conversations with folks that were initiated from these discussion questions, what I'm doing is I'm trying to listen very carefully to what are like the repeated and emphasized responses or attitudes or beliefs towards Christianity, towards Islam, towards the Bible. And a lot of the times, you know, I don't feel like I have great responses to those in the moment, either because I can't think of what to say, or maybe I know of what to say, but I don't know the right Creole way of saying it. And I come back home and I pray about them and I study them, and I try to think of, all right, so this is a repeated idea or repeated objection or repeated philosophy. So what is an effective response to that? And so I kind of develop that, and I learn and kind of craft how to say it in Creole. And then the next time I go out, I'm equipped better with how to respond to that particular, you know, idea that a lot of people have. One other thing I wanted to share is just that I think this approach that I've taken, even though I'm taking it here in West Africa, I think it's actually a really good approach for anyone that is wanting to know where to start, okay? Sometimes when we're starting, we don't know what to say. We don't know how best to transition a conversation. So maybe come up with a list of maybe 5 discussion questions and think about how to say them and kind of practice them like I'm doing here. And then when you ask them, pay attention to what are the common responses to that question and kind of where the conversation goes again and again and again. What are some of the hang-ups during those conversations? And go back home and maybe talk to some wise people in your circle, be able to ask them, what are good responses when people, answer my questions in these ways, or whenever we talk about this topic or that topic. And then be able to come up with better responses to be able to then bridge the gap between those things. So like I said earlier, this is not at all my refined approach to teaching the gospel here in Sierra Leone. However, it's my first steps, and with anyone's first steps, it feels clumsy and you fall down and you got to scrape off your knees at times, and it can be kind of discouraging. But you can't run unless you first walk, and so this is my attempt at just walking. If you have any suggestions or recommendations for things for me to try or things for me to say here, they'd be super welcome. Just leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for your prayers as we try our best here to make every effort and just to apply ourselves so diligently to advancing God's kingdom.